Hello out there in Radio Land. This is Michael. This is the Street Preacher's Corner podcast, the podcast where we claw and scratch for the truth, and then we stumble and mumble about the best way to explain it and present it. Well, we are making some adjustments here. We are still in Mark chapter 7, and we're still here. We're still in Mark 7. We're still in the same passage that we've been in for weeks and weeks now. And if that really grieves you, then grab a shovel. Maybe we can dig our way out together. Mark 7. We're going to call this Mark Lesson 51. See how that works for us. Mark 7. I started to bring a thing with me to read, but then I wanted not doing it, and I could. Sometimes I read things, and sometimes when I record something, the second time or the third time or the fourth time, I don't read it. And so in my mind, I've already read this thing that was really helpful or instructive or edifying, and then I don't read it because you never hear it. It's a process, this thing we do. Mark chapter 7, verse 20. I know that some of you don't even know that we've been in this for a while, but we've been in it for a while. So we've read this passage many times. I'm going to read it at least one more time. Verse 20, he said, "That which cometh out of the man, that defileth the man. For from within out of the heart of men proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, theft, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lasciviousness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, and foolishness." The place that I am recording this podcast at is being attacked by goats, and that's probably the only podcast in America that can say that. I don't know if you guys can hear it, but for whatever reason, these animals have taken to bumping into this place where I'm at. Anyway. See, if we were professionals, I would edit all that out. I'm not even sure if we qualify as amateurs. For context's sake, in case you haven't been with us from the beginning of all this, for context's sake, in Mark 7, Jesus Christ is addressing a crowd. He's talking about the things that defile a man, the things that really defile a man. He talks about how external things, they're not good, but they're not the source of the problem. The source of the problem in your life and in my life is you. I mean, the source of my problem isn't you. The source of my problem is me, and the source of your problem is you. And so that's what we're going through. And we've been going through this list here. We started with evil thoughts, and we referenced back to evil thoughts because all that stuff comes from evil thoughts. We've talked about adulteries. We've talked about fornications. We've talked about murders. We've talked about thefts. And now we're talking about covetousness. And yet it is another item on this list that runs you in your Bible straight back to Exodus 20. When the children of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, God gave them a law, and Exodus 20 is not the beginning, or it's not the end of that conversation. It's not the beginning of that. It's not the end of that revelation from God. It is the very beginning of that revelation from God. Okay, and so Exodus 20, verse 17 says, "Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's." Now, Exodus 20, verse 17 also gives us a really good definition of covetousness. God lists some stuff, and a couple things all those things have in common. One of those things that those things have in common is that they're all things you can see. You can see your neighbor's wife, you can see your neighbor's house, you can see your neighbor's manservant. You can see those things, and chances are, because he's your neighbor, you see them on a fairly regular basis. As Thomas Harris said in one of his Hannibal Lecter books, he said, "We first begin to covet that which we see every day." And the other thing everything on the list has in common is that there are things that aren't yours. It says your neighbor's house, your neighbor's wife, your neighbor's manservant, your neighbor's maidservant, etc., etc. There are things that belong to your neighbor, and not only are you not allowed to steal them, you're not allowed to want to steal them. Okay, so there you go. So let me draw a line real quick. Maybe 2 lines. Because if you take the position as I do, that what you have in your King James Bible is you have all the right words, and that you don't need to run off to other languages to come up with very questionable definitions, then you have to deal with the fact that sometimes the Bible uses a word in more than one way. And so there is a good coveting, and that literally is the word the Bible uses. And there's also a bad coveting. So in 1 Corinthians 12, I probably could quote it, but I'm gonna pull it up here. 1 Corinthians 12. When I say I'm pulling it up, you understand this is a very analog process we go through here. I don't have any kind of software that I'm using to do my Bible study. I use 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper and an ink pen or a pencil and a Bible and a concordance, so I can find the verses. So if I say I pulled this up, I'm not doing this on some fancy gizmo. I'm doing this old school way because the old school is the there's no school like the old school. Why did I say all that? I said all that to give myself time to find this verse. 1 Corinthians 12 verse 31. But covet earnestly the best gifts. So there's an act of coveting that is legitimate. Also, 1 Corinthians 14 verse 39. Wherefore, brethren, covet to prophesy, and forbid not to speak with tongues. So there is a good coveting and a bad coveting. So where covet, and there are some things you should covet because they are yours by right. You have them by right of the new birth. You have the ability to have spiritual gifts, and the Bible takes a position that you should covet earnestly after those things. You should pursue and desire the things that are legitimately yours. That is a good coveting, so to speak. And where coveting becomes inordinate, where coveting becomes inappropriate, where coveting becomes sin, is when what you aspire to have is not yours. Webster's, another example of my old school ways. Webster's, I use Webster's 1828 for my dictionary because they usually have the little note in there that tells you where the verse is, that they got the definition from. Well, Webster's has two definitions, both of which fit the scriptures, depending on where you're looking. So one of them, I'll say A and B. A, to covet is to desire or wish for with eagerness, to desire earnestly, to obtain or possess in a good sense. So that's one coveting. That's where you're coveting earnestly after the best gifts. That's that definition. Definition B is to desire inordinately, to desire that which is unlawful to obtain or possess. So why would it be unlawful? The reason it's unlawful is because it's not yours. The difference between good coveting and bad coveting is sort of like the difference between jealousy and envy. We use words very sloppily sometimes, and we use words inappropriately in our modern vernacular. We'll say, I was really jealous of that guy's car. Well, that's not the right word. The right word to use is I was envious of that guy's car. I was covetous of that guy's car. And the reason I say those are two different words is because God describes himself as being a jealous God. And it is appropriate for him to be jealous or possessive. It's appropriate for you to be jealous or possessive over things that are yours. You could be jealous over your wife. She's yours. You could be jealous over your little bean patch. It's yours. But envy and covetousness, which are very much synonyms, they are the sort of the dark, twisted, sinful version of jealousy. And what we're going to find out when we dig into this is that it is more dangerous than you have any idea for you to engage in covetousness. The Bible says in the book of Proverbs, wrath is cruel and anger is outrageous, but who is able to stand before envy? Apparently, you can handle wrath better than you can handle envy. Apparently, you can handle anger better than you can handle envy. Apparently, you can get over wrath and anger, even though one of them is outrageous and one of them is cruel. They have less of a long-term impact on your spiritual life than envy. It will eat your lunch. Covetousness and envy will eat your lunch. Covetousness, the bad kind, is just like that. Now, before we get too much further here, we got to take a look at Romans 7. I did not realize when I read this, put these notes together, that we'll be going to Romans 7 more than once. Verse 7 of Romans 7. What shall we say then? Is the law sin? God forbid. Nay, I had not known sin, but by the law. For I had not known lust, except the law had said, Thou shalt not covet. So, covetousness is a species of lust. And I personally think it was Paul's besetting sin. He says over in Romans 12, Hebrews 12, Romans 12, Hebrews 12, about running the race with patience and the sin that does so easily beset us. You could argue that every human being, every saved human being, has a sin that is more prevalent than the others. And I would argue that based off Romans 7, that Paul's besetting sin, not that it matters, but Paul's besetting sin was covetousness. And the reason I say that is because it is literally the example he used when he wanted to point out how the law had showed him sin in his own life. The example he used is, I didn't know I was supposed to kill people. The example was, I didn't know I was supposed to covet things. I did not know what a lustful person I was until I had something in writing from God telling me not to lust after things that aren't mine. And so there you go. So you look at the life of the Apostle Paul, his credentials that he rolls out, and I think it's Philippians. We're not going to turn there, where he talks about he was studied the field of Gamaliel, and he was more zealous toward the traditions of his fathers and his brethren. Paul, when he was Saul of Tarsus, was an ambitious dude, and he was the new hotshot. He was the rising young star in the Judean intellectual community, and he was full of zeal. It says in Keep the Law, it says he was blameless. So Paul did all those things that the law said he was supposed to do. But even in all that zeal and all that talent and all that knowledge and all that enthusiasm that he had for what he thought doing what was right, covetousness was a thing. Now, I'm not going to sit back here 2,000 years later and try to psychoanalyze Paul, but I would say, just knowing what we know about him, I would say a young, ambitious guy like him is probably looking at guys like Gamaliel and saying, yeah, I should be like them. I should have that thing going on that he has going on. See, covetousness is one of those things that sometimes accompanies ambition. Covetousness is one of those things that is internal until it's not. It is in your head until it drives you to action. I mean, we said from the beginning in this Mark 7 study, 100 years ago when we started this thing, or it feels like it, that the foundation of everything in that list in Mark 7 is evil thoughts. And so here we have something that is in your head until it's not. And let's look at Micah 2:2. I'm a little distracted by these animals attacking this place that I'm at. It's very bizarre that after all the stuff they have to do and all the places they could go, that they are hanging out right outside the vehicle I'm sitting in and rubbing their horns up against it. And I don't know what they're doing or why they're doing it. So if I sound a little distracted, that's why. Micah 11. I'm sorry, Micah 11. Micah. There's no Micah 11. Micah 2. That makes more sense. Micah 2, verse 2. Let's back up to verse 1. Woe to them that devise iniquity and work evil upon their beds when the morning is light. They practice it because it is in the power of their hand. And they covet fields and take them by violence, and houses and take them away. So they oppress a man in his house, even a man in his heritage. So the idea is that a group of people that want your property will take it. They'll take it by violence. They'll take it by force. And the best example you can come up with that is King Ahab, when he coveted the field or the vineyard of that fellow that lived next door to him. So that covetousness on the part of Ahab led to the death of an innocent man, of a good man. And like I said, Ahab's lust led to murder. See, the thing is, you don't know, unchecked, where your heart will lead you. You don't know where you could find yourself. The world is the history is full of people who started at point A and wound up at point B, and we're not sure how they got there. For those of you keeping track at home of our weird anomalies here, I got out of this vehicle to go address the goat situation, hit the pause button, and the goats ran away. And then I got back in the car and they came back, so I don't know what's going on. They want something from me. When I go to provide it for them, they run away. If you don't have goats, don't get any. I don't tell you. So in Proverbs 21, moving on, Proverbs 21, verse 26. Let's back up. Verse 25. The desire of the slothful killeth him, for his hands refuse to labor. It says, he coveteth greedily all the day long, but the righteous giveth and spareth not. So sometimes the unambitious can also be covetous. The unambitious can want things they have no intention of working for. As it turns out, the ambitious can be covetous, and the greedy can be covetous, and the lazy can also be covetous. But here you see in Proverbs 20 and verse 26, you see a man here is obsessed with what somebody else has. And in Psalm 10, you see a man who is obsessed with what someone else has and will not shut up about it. Verse 3, for the wicked boasteth of his heart's desire. Guy cannot stop thinking about it. Guy cannot stop talking about it. And so that's the situation you find yourself in. My old buddy Thomas Watson, old Puritan that I read every once in a while, wrote an excellent book called, I just lost my brain. It's called, it's got a really long title. Anyway, Thomas Watson said, a good man's thoughts are in heaven. He is thinking of Christ's love and eternal recompense. A covetous man's thoughts are in the world. His mind is wholly taken up with it. So what covetousness is it's not just, I see this guy driving an F-150 or whatever your thing is, and I want it. Covetousness is such an insidious, pervasive sin in the lives of even the best of us, even the hearts of even the best of us, that in Exodus 18, one of the qualifications to be in charge in the Congress of Israel was that you had to hate covetousness. It's a requirement for leadership in the Old Testament Israel, that you be one of those guys that you hate it in other people, which means you sort of necessity have to hate it in yourself. You should hate it in other people. You should hate it in yourself. It is such a destructive sin that you were told as a Christian in 1 Corinthians 5 not even to keep company with people that are given to it. Because, as the old saying goes, they might fling a craven on you. It is such a horrific sin that it can disqualify a pastor, according to 1 Timothy 3. In fact, according to 2 Timothy 3, it is such a satanic sin that it is one of those things that typify men in a world that has grown increasingly wicked and hostile towards God. As this thing starts to wind down, as the world starts to delve into more and more darkness, one of the things that marks just the condition of humanity in general is the idea that men are covetous. And in 1 Timothy 6, it is so vile a sin that it is linked to the root of all evil. Let's look at that one, because that comes up later on. Let's see, 1 Timothy 6. 1 Timothy 6. Pretty sure I left that in the New Testament. 1 Timothy 6. Verse 10. For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. Covetousness is a sin that is linked to the love for money, and it is linked to a sort of thing that can destroy a man's ministry. It can disqualify him as a pastor, and it can destroy his ministry. It can cause him to go off into what we would call false doctrine, and we'll see more of that later on. In 2 Peter 2, verse 14, we're already here. Well, let's go ahead and find it. 2 Peter 2, verse 14. Sorry, let me back up. Let's see. And, let's see. Let's go here. Verse 10, but chiefly them that walk after the flesh and the lust of uncleanness and despise government, presumptuous are they, self-willed, they are not afraid to speak as of evil of dignities. That's the context for what I'm about to read. Verse 14, and shall receive the reward of unrighteousness, as they count it pleasure to riot in the daytime. Hello, George Floyd. Spots they are and blemishes, sporting themselves with their own deceivings while they feast with you, having eyes full of adultery that cannot cease from sin, beguiling unstable souls, and heart they have exercised with covetous practices, cursed children. So it's one of the marks of the presumptuous, people who are self-willed, people who cannot control themselves. It's linked to adultery. So, for example, and just as general rule, if you are sitting around, dear Christian, daydreaming about another man's house or another man's car or another man's wife or another man's ministry, you need to check yourself. Because according to Scripture, you are planting the seeds of your own downfall. It is one of the sneakiest sins that can ever bubble up out of your wicked, depraved heart. Depraved heart, not deprived heart. It sneaks, it skulks. It is a sneaky, sneaky sin. And since we're talking about ministry, and since we're, something, let me just lay this out here before you. It is one of the easiest things in the world. People say there's a lot of jealousy in the ministry. No, there's a lot of envy in the ministry, and we've already said those aren't the same thing. It is very easy to sit back in a preaching meeting or in a Sunday school class or listen to some chucklehead record a podcast while goats attack his vehicle. It is very easy to sit back and listen to a guy try to do something for God. It is very easy to sit back and say to yourself, I could do as good a job as that guy could do. I could do a better job than that guy could do. And if you're listening to this podcast and you think that, you are almost certainly correct. But it's easy to sit back and say, I could do that better than that guy. And then if you don't check yourself, what will happen is, I should be doing that instead of that guy. I mean, a lot of times we've seen it already in the scriptures, when covetousness is brought up, the context is the ministry. And so along those lines, since we're already in 2 Peter 2, I'm going to back up a little bit. But these, verse 1, but there were false prophets also among the people. There's a reference to the Old Testament. Even as there shall be false teachers among you, who privily, so quietly, secretly, privately, shall bring in damnable heresies, even denying the Lord that bought them, and bring upon themselves swift destruction. Now, I'm going to say that these false teachers are actually saved people, because it's denying the Lord that bought them. But anyway, and many shall follow their pernicious ways, by reason of whom the way of truth shall be evil spoken of, and through covetousness shall they, this is still the same group, they with feigned words make merchandise of you. So what you have here, it's quite a thing. Here are some people in a religious setting, and what they're doing is they're teaching false doctrine, and they're making a quick buck off of God's people. I've used this analogy or this example before. We were in a hotel room and we were watching TV, because that's really the only time I'd really see any TV. And we were watching TV, and this religious quote unquote program was on. And if you can imagine this, they had this big pot, this thing was probably, I don't know, 4 feet tall, sitting on this pedestal. And so this guy was preaching, quote unquote, in front of this big clay pot. And there was a bunch of flunkies behind him with Sharpies, and they're writing people's names on this. And so you had the phone bank, like at a telethon kind of thing. And people were calling in, and they were pledging amounts of money to fund this guy's ministry. So they would call in, and if you pledged to $300, I think that was the amount, then they would take your name and they would write it on this clay pot. And when they reached the requisite amount of money that they were hoping to raise, then what they would do is they would smash this clay pot. And they said that when that happened, when the clay pot was smashed, after you had given your money and your name was written on it, and if your name was written on that clay pot when they smashed it, God would smash all the addictions and chains and all this stuff, and you would finally find deliverance. Now that's ridiculous, because that assumes that God is up there in heaven, powerless or unwilling to deliver you until you call this dude and give your $300 to him. He said, "Be one of Gideon's 300." Was the big sales pitch, and man, the phones were ringing off the hook. And I didn't stick around to watch the rest of it. What that is a guy who is making merchandise of his followers. He is saying things to them. They are feigned words, and maybe he's saved, maybe he's not. But what he's doing is making a quick buck off God's people. And so these false prophets, who arguably know that they're conning people, they do so out of covetousness, according to the scripture. That's the verse we just read. They do it because they're covetous. They want things that aren't theirs, and they make merchandise out of God's people in order to fulfill the lusts of their flesh. And you can see examples of that in the Word of Faith movement. You can see examples of that in the New Apostolic Reformation. You can see examples of that in Bill Johnson or Kenneth Copeland or Sid Roth or Joel Osteen. But if you want a biblical example, look at Luke 16. Luke 16, and I'm not going to read the whole thing because there's a parable here that I'm running out of time here. But in verse 16, Jesus is telling a parable, and it says, talking about the responsibility of a follower of Jesus Christ or a follower of God to be faithful in the things that God has given them to do and not be self-serving. Verse 11, if ye therefore have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will commit your trust to true riches? And if ye have not been faithful in that which was another man's, who shall give you that which is your own? No servant can serve two masters, for you will hate the one and love the other, or else you hold the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. And verse 14 says, and the Pharisees also, who were covetous, heard all these things, and they derided him. So Jesus tells a parable. If they'd taken that parable to heart, they could have got some help. Instead, they knew he was talking to them, and they just got mad. And so the old example is the get right or get mad. The parable made them mad because they were covetousness. Because they were covetous. I really have a hard time with this word. Now, covetousness is especially dangerous for the Christian, and I'll show you why. So what we're going to do here is we're going to pick up some verses. Make sure I do this in the right order. Let's look at 1 Thessalonians 2. 1 Thessalonians 2. I guess the goats left because they saw I was not afraid of them. What did I say? 1 Thessalonians. I'm in Timothy. 1 Thessalonians 2. Verse. That can't be right. 1 Thessalonians 2. Verse 5. Let's back verse 4. But as we were allowed of God to be put in trust with the gospel, even so we speak, not as pleasing men, but God will try out their hearts. So this is the issue. The issue is Paul is laying out his own record of faithfulness. He is making the case that we have done, to as much as anybody can do, we've done what God told us to do. For neither at any time use we flattering words, as ye know, nor a cloak of covetousness, God is witness. Nor of men sought we glory, neither of you, nor yet of others, when we might have been burdensome as the apostles of Christ. And he goes on to contrast his behavior among the believers at Thessalonica with how other people had been. And he says, we did not use the cloak of covetousness, which tells me, if you don't know nothing else, is that covetousness is a sin that travels in disguise. William Barclay said, covetousness is a sin with a very wide range. If it is the desire for money, it leads to theft. If it is a desire for prestige, it leads to evil ambition. If it is a desire for power, it leads to sadistic tyranny. If it is a desire for a person, it leads to sexual sin. It hides itself. It travels. It disguises itself as ambition. It disguises itself as zeal. Look at, but one of the reasons this thing is so dangerous is, let's look at Hebrews 13. Hebrews 13. Now here's the context. Well, I don't know that this is so much context. We're just going to go with the verse. Let your conversation be without covetousness, and be content with such things as ye have. For he hath said, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. So God is saying you should be content with what you have because you have me. I mean, that's the point of that verse, is that you may not have the world's riches, but you have me, and I am better than the world's riches. And so because you have me, you ought to be content with whatever you have. Okay? So just keep that in mind, that covetousness has an element in it that is very much a dissatisfaction with God. So Ephesians 5 in one hand. Ephesians 5 in one hand. I've said this before. I always do this as if I'm standing here in front of you when we do this, but I have no idea what you're doing. You could be mowing the lawn for all I know. Although it might be hard to hear me if you're mowing the lawn. Verse 5, or First Ephesians 5 in one hand, Colossians 3 in the other. Ephesians 5 says, but fornication and all uncleanness or covetousness, let it not once be named among you as becometh saints. So God has a zero tolerance policy for covetousness among saints. Why? Well, because we know that covetousness is linked to a distrust of God or a dissatisfaction with God, right? Neither filthiness nor foolish talking nor jesting, which are not convenient, but rather giving of thanks. So once again, covetousness is tied to a dissatisfaction with God, and it's tied to unthankfulness. Okay? And if you know Romans 1, you know where unthankfulness can get you. Colossians 3 just lays it out as plain as you can want it, man. I got the wrong verse, though. Let's see if I can find it. I cannot find it. There's a verse that says covetousness, which is idolatry. I thought it was Colossians 3:8. It is, yeah. Sorry, verse 5. Mortify therefore your members which are upon the earth, fornication, uncleanness, inordinate affection, evil concupiscence, and covetousness, which is idolatry. So another word for covetousness is envy. Another word for covetousness is idolatry. And the reason all that's true is covetous is nothing more or less than an attempt to improve upon God. He's given you himself, but that's not enough. He's given you a wife, but that's not enough. He's given you a house, but it's not enough. He's given you things, and it's just not enough. Why? Because you're unthankful and you're ungrateful. And you, at the end of the day, you don't like God as much as you like that other thing that you're so excited about. The covetous man groans and moans because he believes that he has been treated unfairly. He does not have what he deserved. Ahab thought he deserved Naboth's vineyard, and so did his wife. Covetousness reveals a heart condition in which you are dissatisfied with God, and you feel like God's giving you the short end of the stick. And if God had given you this or that or the other thing, then you'd be happier. You'd be better off. You would be more content. And the reality is God has given you himself, and that's enough. And I talk to you as a person, as a human being, as a man. I talk to you as a guy with everything he owns is broken, and there's enough money to feed everybody, but there's not enough money to do all the extra stuff. And it is easy to look around and say, this person over here, they're not doing right, and look at how they're living. It is so easy to do. It is so easy to do that if you go through your book of Psalms, you'll find David doing that very thing over and over and over again, envying the wicked, which is a verse we didn't get to. Covetous man, how he envies the wicked. He wants what that wicked man has. Well, what that wicked man does not have is peace with God. Now, there ain't much to me. But I can lay my head down tonight and have full and complete confidence that Jesus Christ is enough. And that if my heart stops in the middle of the night, I don't have to worry about what kind of day I've had, because Jesus Christ has taken care of all that for me. And I ought to be content with that. And I ought to be content with the ministry God's given me. And I ought to be content with the wife God's given me. And I ought to be content with the house God's given me. And I ought to be content with all the broken cars God's given me. Because that is a man who can be content in that state and be content with God, 1/3 of the Godhead dwelling inside him, and the freedom from sin, the forgiveness of sin, and all the things that come with the Christian life. A man who can be content with those things is a happy man. So where do we get off this train? Well, one of the things about covetousness is it reveals our heart, and it reveals how unlike God we really can be. It is a sin that hides behind other things. So how do you get past it? How do you get the victory over covetousness? Well, we're going to pick up two verses, both of which are very familiar. 2 Corinthians 10. This is familiar ground because at the end of the day, if everything on that list in Mark 7 is a matter of you thinking correctly versus thinking incorrectly, then you're gonna go through this same ground, no matter whether the issue is adulteries or fornications. You're gonna go through the same ground because it all begins with evil thoughts. So 2 Corinthians 10, verse 5. Actually, let's see here. Verse 3. For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war after the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds, casting down imaginations, and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God. And here's the passage. And bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Jesus Christ. What you have to do, if you're going to have any success, any victory at all in the Christian life, you say, oh, you got this under control? Absolutely not. There are some days that I do and some days where I don't. That's just how that crumbles. But I know how to get the victory should I desire it. I know how to achieve the victory should I really want it. And some days I don't want it. Some days I want to just be a carnal, not on a log and just be a bum. But victory is available because of what Jesus Christ did. And that victory begins with making your brain obey Jesus. I've used this example before. I have a friend who he had some family trouble several years back, and it was entirely his fault. And we were talking about that in the aftermath of all that, and he said that one of the things that he was not doing back then that he was doing at the time we were having this conversation was that he did not consider his thoughts to be sin. Your thoughts, even if they never become action, can be sin. You're told what to think about. You're told what not to think about. You're told here in this passage to take your thoughts captive and make your thoughts obey Jesus. Make your brain do what Jesus says. So that's if you got a problem with covetousness, you have to realize that's what's going on. You have to say, oh, man, I should not be thinking this way. These thoughts are wrong. These thoughts are destructive. These thoughts will lead to other situations. And then in Romans 6, starting at verse 5. For if we have been planted together in the likeness of his death, we shall also in the likeness of his resurrection. Knowing this, that our old man is crucified with him, that the body of sin might be destroyed, that henceforth we should not serve sin. For he that is dead is freed from sin. Now if we be dead with Christ, we believe that we shall also live with him, knowing that Christ being raised from the dead dieth no more, death hath no more dominion over him. For in that he died unto sin once, but then he liveth unto God. Likewise, verse 11, likewise reckon ye also yourselves to be dead indeed unto sin, but alive unto God through Jesus Christ our Lord. Let not sin therefore reign in your mortal body, that you should obey it in the lust thereof. Neither yield your members as instruments of unrighteousness unto sin, but yield yourselves unto God as those that are alive from the dead, and your members as instruments of righteousness unto God. For sin shall not have dominion over you. Why? For ye are not under the law, but under grace. Man, you talk about an idea and a sentiment that is misunderstood and abused among professing Christians is the idea we're not under the law, we're under grace. And what they take that to mean is I can do whatever I want because I'm not under the law. But the context of that passage is not that you can do whatever you want. Under grace doesn't mean you can do whatever you want. Under grace means you can do the things that you should do. So how do you get a victory over covetousness? You make your brain obey Jesus, and you make your body do the right thing. And since this sin begins with evil thoughts, we must needs address the thoughts. When you have these thoughts of wanting things that aren't yours, what you have to do is you got to stop right there. And you got to take those thoughts captive, and you got to understand those thoughts are sin. You have to confess them as sin before God, and you have to understand that Christ died for those sins, and because he did, you may struggle, but you're not bound. A guy that's tied to a chair can't fight back. But a guy that's up and moving around, he can fight back. And Christian, you're not tied to the chair of sin. You've been loosed by Jesus Christ. And when these things in your life, these things in your flesh, when they come at you, you throw some hands. You scrap, man. You claw and you scratch and you claw and you kick and you bite and you spin and you gouge its eyes out. And you say, no, we're gonna do what's right today. We're not gonna think about this. We're not gonna look at this. We're not gonna aspire for this. We're not gonna desire this. We're gonna make our brain obey Jesus. Because that sin cannot win long term because Jesus Christ already defeated on the cross. And what your burden is to live righteously, to yield your members as servants of righteousness, is what the Bible commands you to do. And you can do it. God never tells a man to do something that God does not expect that man to actually do, and God does not ever tell a man to do a thing that man cannot do. So there you go. Covetousness, an inordinate desire for something that is not yours, that can lead to murder, can lead to theft, can lead to adultery. It is a sin common to both the lazy and the ambitious, and it is a thing that will destroy your ministry, disqualify you from the ministry, ruin your life, destroy your testimony, burn down everything good in your entire life if you don't hold it in check. It all begins with the thoughts inside your head. Well, I think we've covered that as much as it's going to be covered today, by me anyway. And so this has been Michael. This has been the Street Preacher's Corner. Thank you for listening, all four of you. And tell your friends, tell your neighbors, do something for Jesus. Risk your life for Jesus before it's all over with. And I will see you on the other side.